Good afternoon, everybody. As always, my name is JC, and welcome to my channel, Every Man's Thoughts. In today's video, we're going to cover some of the recent controversies and headlines surrounding Lord of the Rings on Prime. Before I jump in, I will be covering the show for the entirety of this series, so if that is of interest to you, please consider subscribing to my channel. And with that, let's begin. The first thing I want to talk about today is also the most ridiculous. This story and headline come from The Hollywood Reporter. Mortal Kombat star accuses Amazon's Lord of the Rings of lacking Asian actors. Ludi Lin says Amazon Studios' upcoming mega-budget fantasy series is not diverse enough. The irony here is that for fans of the upcoming series, forced diversity and wokeness may be their single biggest concern. That being said, let's break this down and give it proper context. In a tweet aimed at Amazon Studio Chief Jennifer Salke, Mr. Lin said, "It's going to be difficult to justify building a huge world without any characters that look Asian. Turn that I assume he meant imagination, on us. It's not hard, we're right here." The tweet was in response to an interview Ms. Salke gave in which she justified the high startup price of the show by saying they are creating a huge world and building assets that they will be using for the life of the series. There are several issues here. First, half of the entire first season is going to be directed by Wayne Che Yip, a Chinese director. Second, the show already has incredible diversity. In fact, as I alluded to earlier, given the unique cultural origins of the source material, the show already has more diversity than many of the fans are comfortable with. However, the actor doesn't seem concerned with diversity as a whole. He specifically targets Asian inclusion. Is that where we're at now, where having fair and equitable hiring practices to create a diverse cast appropriate to the story you're about to tell is no longer good enough? Do we now have to make a list so we can go down and make sure we've checked every box for every niche subcategory, even if their inclusion is neither relevant or possibly even appropriate to the story being told? This is, of course, a ridiculous standard, and putting agendas over stories is a prime example of why people push back on these type of issues. As we move on, I now want to take a look at someone who has an equally extreme opinion from the opposite perspective. If I could draw your attention to this article on IGN. Now, this is an interview with Jennifer Salke. If you recall, she is the Amazon Studio Chief. I'm going to read you these 3 quick paragraphs and then play a short video clip. As I do that, please keep in mind how remarkably mundane this article is. There are also some grammar and sentence structure issues, but it's IGN, so what do you expect? Anyway, here we go. The stakes are high for the Amazon Studios' upcoming Lord of the Rings series. With a reported first season budget of $465 million, it will be one of the most expensive shows ever made. How do you justify such an expensive endeavor? Speaking to The Hollywood Reporter, Amazon Studio Chief Jennifer Salke said it was mostly due to the madness of the market, noting that Netflix paid I'm guessing that's $469 million, for 2 sequels to Knives Out. Now, here's the key paragraph. But she also revealed Amazon's lofty expectations for the forthcoming prequel. As for how many people need to watch Lord of the Rings, a lot. A giant global audience needs to show up to it as appointment television, and we are pretty confident that that will happen. Now, let's step away for a second and ask ourselves, what could possibly be controversial about any of that? With that in mind, let's take a look at the reaction that generated. I'm now going to play a short video clip. I'd like to note that this entire video is based on one phrase from one sentence from that IGN article I just read you. The phrase is a giant global audience. Before we even get to the video, look at this insane thumbnail. Amazon destroys Lord of the Rings. The only thing an IGN article has ever destroyed is their own credibility. Alright, thumbnail aside, let's just watch the video.
I don't know whatever happened to if it's not broke, don't fix it, but that's what modern media is these days. They take things that we love, in particular here in the West, and decide to make them awful. Decide that they aren't woke enough. Decide that they aren't inclusive enough. Decide that they need, quote, updating or forward thinking or I don't know, whatever propagandic term they use to ruin something, they do it. This is evident in literally every reboot ever. It starts with obviously the obvious, Ghostbusters 2016. I'm actually super unoptimistic for Ghostbusters Afterlife. All of the things that we loved as children is being destroyed these days. Reboots for He-Man look awful. She-Ra was an embarrassment. The list goes on. And now one of our most beloved films, Lord of the Rings prequel, the Lord of the Rings prequel series that Amazon is putting out, looks to be headed a disastrous direction.
I played this portion because I wanted you to have the full context of where he's coming from when he sets up his opinion. I can actually live with some of what he said there. We may disagree on how severe the issue is, but we can agree there is an issue. Now let's move to the one sentence from the article. For transparency's sake, I did edit out a 3-minute section. It was a paid advertisement. No relevant content was removed.
This article put out by IGN this morning says, Amazon says its Lord of the Rings prequel series needs to appeal to a, quote, giant global audience. So we all know what that means, right? It's going to be awful.
And just like that, we're off and running. No evidence presented, not even a reasonable supposition. Just straight to worst case scenario conclusion. Let's continue.
You can see Nerdrotic, because the last ones were such niche successes, pointing out the fact that the books and movies are wildly successful. Yellow Flash, I want to see a Waxman of color play Gandalf. It's time. Code 4, we're going to make Token roll in his grave so hard he'll single-handedly solve the world's energy needs after we hook him up to a generator. China, the giant global audience is China. That's correct.
He immediately transitions into reading the comments as if he's put forth a compelling argument. Then, of course, comes the China boogeyman, once again without evidence. If you remember from my earlier videos when Jeff Bezos said that he wanted the next Game of Thrones, and people took that to mean that Lord of the Rings was going to have gratuitous sex and gratuitous violence. In reality, of course, all he really meant was they wanted a show that was extremely successful. Well, this is that all over again, people taking quotes out of context just to further an agenda. In some ways, I actually feel bad for people making this show. They're caught between these two extremes, neither of which cares anything about the show, but both of which are happy just to burn it down for their own purposes. Before we move on, I do want to say one thing. I do not support harassment or suppression of opinions for anybody, even people I disagree with, including these two gentlemen. Please do not leave this video and go cause trouble on their social media profiles. If you have something strong to say, put it in the comment section. That's what it's there for. Thank you. Now, let's talk about our new director. The next thing I want to talk about today is this Deadline article that reports director Charlotte Brandstrom, apologies if I did not pronounce that correctly, has signed on to direct 2 episodes of Lord of the Rings on Prime. This caught my eye because as I was reading Miss Brandstrom's profile, it began to dawn on me I was actually familiar with quite a bit of her work. The Man in High Castle, Outlander, The Witcher, etc. The problem is, as I reviewed her specific episodes, they were consistently among my least favorite for each respective series. I noted recurring issues with things like theme and pacing that just didn't synchronize with other episodes of each series. It's her recent work on The Witcher that gives me my biggest concern. For those that don't know, The Witcher's first season was based on a collection of short stories, not dissimilar to Tolkien's Unfinished Tales and the last 2 chapters of the Silmarillions. One of these short stories that she was asked to bring to life is anecdotally a fan favorite. This story became Season 1, Episode 6, called Rare Species. I think it's fair to say that although Witcher fans are hopefully optimistic, they did regard Season 1 as an overall disappointment. Even grading on that curve, Episode 6 Rare Species was frankly an embarrassment. There is a clear shortcoming when contrasted to other episodes of the season, and frequently is disparagingly referred to as something you might see on Xena Warrior Princess. I like Xena Warrior Princess, but that's Saturday afternoon television from 30 years ago. I do want to say I think Miss Brandstrom has a solid talent for comedy direction. I just don't know how applicable that will be in the new series. Well, that's it for me today, guys. Please consider subscribing to my channel or smashing that like button, and I will see you next time.